officially beginning. We left off talking about what makes a true spiritual person. The Tibetan talks about three basic qualities here because, what makes a true spiritual person is an interesting question because people have a lot of different ideas as to what a spiritual person is. Some people think that it has to be somebody that's a minister in a church or something to be really spiritual, or a nun, or somebody like Mother Teresa. DK points out that, even a scientist can be pursuing a spiritual cause, or a politician, or you don't have to be in a religion. He says there's three things for, as far as the kind of the seeker needs in order to qualify as a spiritual person. He needs to have ideals. He needs to have a mind that's set for group service that goes beyond service for self. And he needs to be willing to sacrifice to achieve a good cause. And he says these three things constitute what you might call a spiritual person that stands out beyond the average. Now, keep in mind, a spiritual person that's highly evolved will be different than a spiritual person that's not highly evolved. Because, in other words, a spiritual person is a person that's willing to stretch himself to the most he can to go beyond the world of selfishness. Anyway, for these three characteristics are those, he says, belong to the person that's become sensitive to the soul. And then once the person gets some soul contact, he says there's three more words that describe the person. And that is knowledge, love, and sacrifice. So he moves up from idealism, group service, and sacrifice to knowledge, love, and sacrifice. And the common word between the two is sacrifice. Sacrifice was the key word for the Piscean age that we're now leaving behind. And we're leaving behind an old idea of sacrifice to a new idea of sacrifice, but sacrifice is never left behind completely. In the Piscean age, you sacrificed everything for the kingdom of heaven, and you never really expected to get anything till after you died. In the Aquarian age and sacrifice, we have a more realistic idea that sacrifice is actually a payment for something. For instance, when you go to the store and you buy a head of lettuce or whatever, you sacrifice some money to get something else that you want, and that's the true principle of sacrifice. That which is given away is never just completely given away. It comes back to you. As you give, so shall you receive. And in the Piscean age, the receiving part was never taught. It was just mainly give, and you don't really receive till after you die and go to heaven type of thing. That was kind of the idea, that you're just supposed to give everything to the church and take care of the church and not worry about yourself. But in the Aquarian age, the idea of sacrifice is more of a trade. And the DK points out that the concept of sacrifice applies to every life. Even, he says, the Ancient of Days made a tremendous sacrifice to come here to the earth to help us evolve. And he's committed to be here until, he says, the last weary pilgrim makes his way home. And he points out that this was a tremendous sacrifice for him to come here and do that. He said he had to turn his back on the sun and become a son to the lesser lives. By turning his back on the son, it means that there was a path of progress ahead for him that he had to forego in order to become a light to the lesser lives, to pull them up in their evolution. And this is the basic principle that belongs to the name of Jesus Christ, which that name means anointed to serve, or anointed to deliver. And so this name implies this eternal principle of sacrifice, that we're anointed to turn our back at times on our own progression and help others to move forward. Then when we help others to move forward, someone will take a hold of us that's higher up and pull us up higher. And this is a way to make maximum progress. And this is the great principle of sacrifice, in the fact that we can we can turn our back on our own progression, help others, and then in an unexpected time that we're not even maybe looking for, someone higher will say to us, come up higher and I will help you. And this is an eternal chain that goes all the way up to our source. And how far up that goes is way beyond the consciousness of any person on the planet. Okay, any comment on that before we move on?
So it's like having one hand out and one hand up.
Right, eternal chain.
Eternal chain. And not Jesus Christ, does that mean one who is anointed to raise higher, to elevate?
Yeah, anointed to deliver. Christ comes from the word that means anointed, like anointed with oil. And
doesn't Jesus mean savior, to
savior or deliver? Yeah,
deliver.
Yeah, right. So anointed, basically anointed to deliver. And and we're told that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, it says, baptize them in not the names, plural, but the name, singular. And what is that name? That name is that meaning of the word Christ, Jesus Christ, anointed to deliver. Because that's the great name of which all deity is known by, is to sacrifice themselves and deliver those who are in need, and then you will be taken up higher. And this is the eternal law of sacrifice, which in the end isn't really sacrifice at all. It's just, it seems like it at the time, that's for sure. Well, it's like when you make a down payment on a house, big sacrifice to make that down payment, but you're getting something for it. So it's tough coming up with the money, but it's you're getting something more valuable than money. You're getting a place of shelter, so to speak. So, okay, good points. Anything else?
Well, it's said in the Bible, if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out. And if thy right arm offend thee, cut it off. It doesn't mean literally. It means something that is so dear to you, that stands in your way of progress. You have to cut it out.
Yeah.
Rip it out from yourself.
I read about this Catholic saint that actually blinded herself because of that scripture, and she was made a saint apparently because of it. I don't think she probably should have been noted for her stupidity rather than sainthood, I would think. But
my mom had a book on all the saints, and I read through some of them, and man, there's a lot of wackos.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them were very spiritual people, but some of them were kind of strange. All right, I gotta admit.
Saint Rick.
Okay, he talks about the progression of humanity as a whole, and he says humanity has progressed in a number of steps. He says, first of all, they moved out into human self-consciousness. This was our first step. And this first happened to the first man, which was 18 million years ago, according to DK. Much farther back than science has us. Science, the oldest, they keep going farther back. When I was young, it was just a few 100,000 years, and it got to 1,000,000 years. And I think the oldest human they found now is about 4 million years old or so. So they're getting closer to the 18 million years all the time. But, it's amazing how buried everything gets after a few thousand years. You just go back to the time of Christ, and they have a heck of a time finding artifacts just 2,000 years old, let alone a million or 18 million years old.
Well, the first humans were etheric. They weren't physical.
Well, the first physical ones was 18 million years. Before that, they were etheric, right? The first two races were not even on the physical planet. And okay, so the first step was self-consciousness. And then the second step, he says, they became emotionally polarized, and they became selfish and governed by desire. Now, a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their head around the idea that selfishness is part of our evolution. But we go into, first of all, we live by instinct. Like you go to the native tribes, they're pretty sharing and instinctual and group-minded, but they do it by instinct. Then when they evolve out of that and they start thinking of self on the emotional plane, then they become very selfish and warlike and fight with each other, and just they're only interested in what benefits them. And this is a step. All of us has gone through this step in our past lives one time or another, and it was part of our evolution. Then he says, step 3 here, the above 2 stages plus a growing intellectual grasp of environing conditions. So as people gravitate into the emotional self, they eventually begin to train their brains, their physical brains, to observe what's going on and do some mental calculations. And then they reach the 4th stage, he says, of gaining a feeling of responsibility to family and friends. So your kids start meaning a lot to you, your wife and parents and associations take on strong meaning. So the person begins to look outside of self a little bit. He looks to his children, his family, his friends, his religious associates perhaps. And so he begins to look outside of himself and his own personal interests. This is a step in evolution for as we progress. Then the next stage he calls a stage of ambition, of longing for influence and power in some field of human expression. This leads to a fresh endeavor. So in other words, he begins his first stab at being an initiative of some kind. He wants to excel, so he learns some talent, some sport, maybe music, some art, and he wants to set himself apart as being a unique person. And this causes him to start self-initiating a little bit. And then the next step in human progression, he says, is a coordinating of the personality equipment under the above stimulus. What do you think he means? A coordinating of the personality equipment. He has a really unusual wording that puts a lot of first readers off till once you get used to him, he's fine. But he has an unusual way of wording. What does he mean by personality equipment?
How you come across to other people.
that's what you use your personality equipment for. What is your actual equipment?
Your personality equipment is the way you think and the way you feel and the way they're integrated in the physical world.
Right. So your feelings, your thoughts, and
Right.
also your body.
You're right.
Okay.
Those
So
three: physical, emotional, and mental. The way they're coordinated and aligned with whatever it is your higher mind can contrive.
yeah. So you want to first of all, in the physical, you learn to coordinate yourself. Let's say kids these days play these video games, and they learn to coordinate their mind and body by playing these games. I remember when I first started the video games myself, I went through a phase where I played them for a while, Asteroids and Donkey Kong and all those things, and it really helped my physical coordination. Helped me to learn to pay attention a little bit. Then uh, I went through that phase, and for about a year I played those, and then I didn't play anything else pretty much. But I did notice it did help physical coordination. Now, if you learn to ski or bowl or any of the sports, that helps the physical coordination. Now, emotional is much more difficult. We have to learn to control our anger, our jealousy, our negative feelings, as well as our positive feelings. Including like happiness, not let happiness and satisfaction get the better of us to the point that we just relax too much. But coordinate that with the physical and develop what is called emotional intelligence. Because emotional intelligence is they say more potent for success than brain intelligence in many ways.
It also sounds like it's saying that, in essence, if you want to master something or be a master, you have to begin by doing your best to act like one.
Right, and he does say that too. He says that operate on the assumption that you are already there, and it helps you get there a lot faster. Is one of the things he does teach. And then the third part is mind. So we need to learn to coordinate the mind, emotions, and body so they're in harmony with each other. So we're able to use all three to further our goals. Okay, the next stage, he says, is a stage of influence. Selfishly used, frequently destructive, because the higher issues are not registered yet. Okay, have you ever known anyone kind of in that stage? They're very selfish, they're talented, but they're somewhat destructive, and because they don't have their mind on the higher issues of the soul. But they're quite influential. A lot of politicians kind of remind you of that type of person there at that stage.
A lot of actors, actresses.
Oh yeah, they are too.
People that read one chapter of a book and then they're experts on it.
Yeah, how many people you know that's been through that?
I think you're being generous with the whole chapter.
Okay, and then finally he says the stage of a steadily growing group awareness. This is viewed as a field of opportunity and service. And this is this is the last one he mentions, but once a person reaches that, then he opens up a whole field where he progresses toward the soul and initiation and all these steps in progress await him. And so this step of group awareness that, it's the world. In other words, he reaches a point where he realizes the world just doesn't revolve around him. For much of our progression, it's like we are the center of the universe, and the universe revolves around us, and us being the center is the only thing that counts. And that's kind of the attitude we have for many, many lives of our progression until we finally reach the point to where we realize that you're one of many, and all of us count, all of us are important, and to serve another is to serve yourself. Okay, any comments on that before we move on?
Yeah, in other words, start groups.
Yeah, people start groups not only to be the center of attention, but for the service to others is the correct motivation, he says, for group work. He says this latter stage puts a person on the path of discipleship, and this is where we hope to land ourselves, is discipleship. And it's interesting, discipleship is a word that covers everyone from this point on, because the Tibetan says of himself, even, he says, I am a disciple. I'm a disciple of a certain degree. So I like that way he words himself, in such a way that he doesn't put himself above anybody else that's struggling like ourselves. In many ways, we're all in the same boat, no matter where we are. Even the Solar Logos is a disciple of a certain degree, struggling to make his next step forward.
He says we're all average. in the middle of something.
Yeah, in the way that he puts it, yeah. He says the problem for seekers is to discern where they are on the path. This is a big problem, and especially among many of the teachers that are out there. A lot of the teachers that are out there think they're already a master. Some of them think they're really high up there that I've read. Every time I come across a new teacher, I check them out. And some of them think they're, 6th, 7th degree initiates. Now, Christ was, Jesus was past his 4th degree on the cross. And the Christ that was in him started his 7th degree. So people come along saying the 7th or 8th degree initiates really got their head in the cloud when you make any comparison between the two there. And so it's interesting. Now, with regular disciples, regular seekers, like the group we have right here, some may put yourself too low. Like some will say, well, I don't think I have enough soul contact or anything, or enough contact, or not sure where I am. But this is what we want to ask ourselves. You want to ask yourself where you really are. The first degree initiate has mastered control over his physical self to the point, not to the point where he does stuff like he can stop his heart and that type of thing. We're not talking about that type of thing, but we're talking about the basic desires of the physical body he can put under his control if circumstances warrant. Doesn't mean he always has to put them under control. Like, say if he decides to, he can fast for a week or 10 days, and he has control over that. But that doesn't mean he's going to be fasting all the time. So he basically has control over the physical appetites and sex. So he can handle them in a positive way that fits with his concept of what's good and bad. Okay. Now, all of us have different, if we're raised in a religion, different religions have different ideas what's right about sex and what you should eat and drink and everything like that. So say if a disciple of the first degree is in a religion and believes in it, he will be able to abide by their teachings on diet and sex. And just for example, if he's out of that religion, like many of us have broken off, then we have our own ideas of what's good and bad, and the first degree will be able to live by those things. The second degree will have control over his emotional self. So he can channel. Doesn't mean he will never have negative feelings, but when he does, he channels them to harmlessness, and to the point that they will not be destructive. And so this is very difficult too. And he also learns to master glamours. So what a glamour is, it's an inflation of the ego. You have a feeling of self-importance that makes you feel more important than you deserve to be. Okay, and this is basically what a glamour does. So when the person overcomes glamour, he puts his ego in check, so he sees himself for what he really is, and he doesn't inflate his individual importance. And then the person that's approaching the third degree learns to master illusions. So he won't be tricked by the tricks out there. There's all kinds of tricks out there and teachings that even beyond the glamours, they sound good, but they have flaws in them. The person approaching the third degree of initiation will be able to see through these flaws in the various teachings that are out there, or in the various teachings he has received. All of us, when we were young, were taught things somewhere along the road that were incorrect. And to master illusion, we have to go through and look at our lives and unravel everything we were taught that is not correct. And it's very difficult, because if something's ingrained in us, it's almost like a hypnotic suggestion. It's interesting that if a hypnotist takes a person on stage and tells him that when he says a certain word, the guy's head will itch and he will scratch it. Okay, so so he takes him out of his trance, and the guy can't even remember being in the trance because he was really deep. So the guy says a certain word and the guy scratches his head. And then the hypnotist will say to him, well, why did you just scratch your head? And he says, because it itched. What do you think? Now he can even do something ridiculous. He can say, when I say a certain word, you will sing the Star-Spangled Banner. Okay. So he takes the guy out of his trance, and he says a certain word, and in front of the whole audience, the guy starts belting out the Star-Spangled Banner. But what's interesting is when the hypnotist asks him, why did you just sing the Star-Spangled Banner? What's interesting is he will have a logical explanation as to why he sang the Star-Spangled Banner. He said, well, I just thought it'd be a fun thing to do at the time. I thought that it would be a rip-snorting kind of funny thing to do. He would have some explanation that seemed logical to his mind as to why he blurted out the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, from the time we're born until we reach a degree of enlightenment, we have these hypnotic illusions implanted in our mind that were implanted there, almost like hypnotic suggestions as we're growing up. And when you ask somebody that has an illusion of some kind, well, why do you believe this? Just like the guy that was hypnotized that sang the Star-Spangled Banner, he will come up with a reason for it that is reasonable to him, but to you, it may not sound reasonable at all. to the audience, the reason the guy sang the Star Spangled Banner does not sound reasonable to the audience, but it sounded reasonable to the guy that was in the illusion. Okay. Now the same thing with us. we all have implanted in us when we were younger different illusions that we have to discover, and we have to discover why we think that. And so we have to look at our lives and say, now, why did I believe what I believe? Or why do I believe what I believe? Or why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I on this path that I'm on? And we have to understand the real reason why we're doing these things. There's certain things all of us have to unravel. And it's easy to get tricked. And not only that, but once you solve one illusion, you may encounter another teacher that may put you under another illusion. And this is kind of indicated on one of the labors of Hercules, where he was trapped by this teacher and tied down, and he was kind of imprisoned for a long period of time till he was able to break free. And then Hercules took the teacher and he tied him up. And so the teacher wound up getting his own medicine back. Okay, so probably the main thing that everybody here needs to assess of themselves is, am I sincere? Am I trying to do my best? Am I interested in beyond just my own self-interest? If all these questions warrant a yes answer, then at least you know you're on the path of return. And I believe everybody here in this group is on the path. And so assess where you are on the path to the best of your ability and try to figure out what your next step is. To get your true next step will take a degree of soul contact. But fortunately for many of us, our soul, if we don't get the message, our soul sends us hints. The hints could come in a dream. It could come in something that happens in your life. It could come in maybe an accident that happens that wakes you up to a greater reality. You get hints from your soul. Now, sometimes you will just get a message, you just feel it internally, and you just know what you're supposed to do. Other times you don't know for sure, or maybe you're just not paying enough attention, and then your soul will grab you and shake you and say, hey, listen to me. And it sends this message, sometimes causing us quite discomfort and pain for a period of time until it sinks in. And so DK emphasizes that every 10 years we need to reflect on our life for that 10 years to give us hints about what we're supposed to do for the next 10 years. So that's a really good advice there. The one thing that none of us should be doing is just standing still. We should always be trying to figure out what our next step is, and then taking it to the best of our ability. Basically, follow the highest you know. If you follow the highest you know with sincerity, then sooner or later your next step will be revealed. It's just a matter of time. As long as you're sincere and honest with yourself, that's the important thing. Okay, any comments or questions before we move on from there?
Yeah, JJ, I had a question. When you were talking about mastering those different things as you climb the ladder, first initiate, second initiate, so forth, is it possible to master one of the higher things before one of the lower things? For example, is it possible for someone to overcome glamour issues but haven't really mastered things on a more physical level?
Partially, as we progress, we work on the physical, emotional, and mental. We can be working on them all at the same time. But to completely master the lower, you can't completely master the higher first. You have to master it a stage at a time. So as you're progressing, say, well, let's take John F. Kennedy, for instance. He was pretty wild and crazy with his sexual life. On the other hand, it might have been within his belief system because his dad taught him that that was the way of the world. So I don't know, maybe he thought that was okay in his mind, you know. But it appears that there was some mastery still needed in that particular area, yet he was very controlled emotionally and mentally, but he still had some work to do in that area, unless he was just totally convinced his dad was right, that was
Yeah, and
okay.
I mean, nobody really knows what went on in his mind, but he seemed
Yeah.
to be a rather unassuming and humble person, but definitely had some issues in the lower, in the physical. And that's a very good example of what I was talking about, or what I was asking about.
Yeah, but say, especially with the emotional mental, you can't master the mental till you master the emotional. But as you're mastering the emotional, you will partially master the mental. You know,
They overlap.
right? They overlap, but you don't say you can master maybe halfway through the mental mastery as you finish off the emotional mastery. You may be halfway to the mental, or maybe just a quarter of the way, or different. So your progression overlaps to a degree, but you never will master the mental before the emotional because they're intertwined too much.
Okay, thank you. You answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, good point though.
A lot of it depends on your ray makeup. And it's not to be taken linearly, but holistically, I think.
Yeah.
Sometimes even we think we've mastered things mentally, we find ourselves doing things, we find reoccurrences of things we may not have mastered.
Right. The even numbered rays, the 2, 4, 6, is related to the feeling, intuitional levels. And the 1, 3, 5, 7 is more related to the mind. So if your ray makeup is more on the odd numbers, odd rays, it'll be easier to work on the mind. And if you're on the even rays, it's easier to work on the heart and the intuition. And most of us have kind of a balance of the rays within us. Like a person may have a 7th ray physical body, a 6th ray emotional body, a 5th ray mind, 4th ray personality, 2nd ray soul, 1st ray monad, or you have all these different rays affecting you, but there will be one particular ray that will be strongest as an overall influence in your life. And what do you think your most influential ray is, Ed?
Well, I've come to realize I'm a 2nd ray soul. I have a 3rd ray mind and a 6th ray emotional body.
That's probably pretty accurate.
What do you think your personality ray is, Ed?
Well, I think that some people have said that over the years that, well, I'm very impersonal. I think that's a good thing. I think that I feel I have a balance in a lot of ways, but probably I have a 3rd ray sort of a personality, I think.
Yeah, what the Tibetan says, the way to tell is to look at when you were younger where your interests were, and then you probably reached a point to where you switched your interest somewhat. And when you switched your interest for the disciple, that was toward your soul ray. And then your interest when you were younger would indicate your personality ray. So let's go back to Ed when you were like, say 18 or 19. What kind of things were you interested in back then?
Well, when I was 16, 17, 18, I meditated in the morning and I studied the works of
You meditated way back then?
Ballards, yes.
Wow.
I actually went with a year without eating meat because I read that we don't aspire to be like the animals, so we don't eat the animals.
Yeah, well, it sounded like you might have been in your soul ray right from the time you were young.
Well, I don't make any boastful statements. I just try to have a fair and balanced look at it.
Yeah. How about you, Joshua? What do you think your main ray of influence is?
Main ray of influence. That's a little bit trickier. I don't know. Probably first ray.
First ray?
But I've been. I don't know how to put it.
Do emotional people get upset around you?
Do emotional people get upset?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like Donald Trump is a first ray guy, and emotional people get really upset around
He
him.
upsets everybody.
That's a really great example.
Well, I guess it's more like when
Trump.
I unvarnishedly express myself, people get upset about it, but I wind up not doing that too often.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the third ray is a ray of tactfulness, and I think I try to be tactful in my personality.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Anybody else? Is there anybody else figured out what rays they might be on?
I'm probably second and sixth.
Yeah, I think your soul's probably second, I'd guess.
Yeah, that'd be my guess.
Yeah.
You think your personality is sixth ray Curtis or something else?
I think we have quite a few second ray souls here in this group.
Yeah.
What do you think is the sixth ray in your makeup, Curtis? The personality or the astral body or what?
Man, that'd be it. Well, that's idealism, devotion. My personality ray might be sixth ray. My soul ray is second ray. But I have a strong bent for fifth ray of science as well. A little bit like Ed. It's kind of hard. I'm a complicated soul. It's taken me years to figure out who I am. I'm not really sure. I can't really delineate it. A little bit of everything in there. But I wanted to say, Joe, when you're talking about the overcoming Maya, glamour, and illusion, it's interesting to study how Jesus overcame those three temptations when the devil took him to a high place and said, if you be the Son of Man, turn those stones into bread. And he said, man shall not live by bread alone. And that demonstrated his overcoming Maya, or attachment to the physical. But as an assignment, I'll tell you, study the second and third temptations and how he overcame glamour and illusion, and how those temptations pertain to glamour and illusion. Now
if thou be the Son of God, throw yourself off this tower.
Yeah, that's a glamour.
Yeah, that's a glamour, because that will show how important you are.
Show how strong
everybody will know you're supernatural if you can survive that.
Yeah. Well, don't tell them what illusion is. You have to figure out what the illusion was when he went through the third temptation.
Right. I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world if you bow down and worship me.
Yeah, if you bow down. And how is that an illusion?
Okay, well, that'd be a good thought to leave us with, because we're at the end of our time, and so we could take off and talk about that. And next time we're going to talk about the new group of world servers. And let me end with this paragraph. He says, finally, a person becomes a disciple and obtains soul contact and loses self in the service of others. Instead of using a group for self-glorification, he serves the group. And so this is a step that we all need to assess for ourselves. What can we do to serve the group, to serve the whole? See ourselves as not the center of the whole, but a part of a cell within the whole that is serving the whole, and by serving the whole, we get nourished ourselves. Okay, any other comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I'd like to spend more time and tell you all about Rome. It's fascinating.
Oh, okay.
But
I can just leave you guys on to talk as long as you want. And
well, here's the thing. We have a dinner engagement in 15 minutes, and it's 20 minutes away. So I don't have time to do that right this minute.
Okay, well, Joshua can call you then.
Yeah,
Joshua.
I'll message you, and we'll see when you're free, if that works.
Yeah, I'll have plenty of time during the week, and I'd love to talk to you and get to know you even a little better.
All right, cool. Yeah, and if other people want to hear your story, we can post a link on the molecular group.
And we could meet at other times during the week as well.
That's true.
Yeah, you guys do quite a bit of activity on the molecular chat and group in different places, so that's good that you're getting to know each other. So more you guys get to know each other, the better it is. Okay, any other comments or questions before we sign off?
I found this week a realization that, through our lives, often we ask God to make changes in the world and fix this and that. But I've realized that being the fourth kingdom in nature, we are the pivot point through which all things must be done. I have to realize that it isn't going to be some hand that comes and does things for the world. It's got to be you and me and the group.
Right. You and I are the arms and legs of God, so to speak. It's what one of the favorite things I like to espouse.
You're absolutely correct, Ed. We got to pray to God to change those other people to make it happen. That's
hey,
I have to fit myself first for service.
We've got to be their saviors on Mount Zion. So we've got to be we've got to be the person that they've been waiting for. So
yeah, like Obama said, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Yeah. That's interesting. Funny. Cool.
Okay.
Have a great week.
Yeah, have a great week, everybody. Good to see you again. It's great to meet with you every week, and glad, especially appreciate you regulars.
It's better than church, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, man. I used to about fall asleep in church. The greatest part I got out of church was learning to see auras of the speakers, because I would pay attention to them. That made church kind of interesting for me near the end when I was going at one time, but but the speakers always did put me to sleep. One of the few speakers I heard in church that I liked was Curtis, when he showed up, and he just moved into the New Plymouth where I was living, and he gave a speech. And so I thought, boy, my little nephew's, he's sounds a lot more intelligent than he used to. I'm going to invite him over and see if might be possibly interested in higher stuff. And sure enough, that was the beginning. That was the beginning of a lot of things.
A lot of things. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
JJ, I have a question.
Oh, Thomas, didn't see you there. Yeah.
You were talking about time travel earlier and stuff. Can one time travel and change the past and help Hitler win the war or kill Jesus or something? Can one change the past through time travel?
Well, that would take a little bit of discussion. Why don't you say that question for next week and we'll talk about it?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, interesting question. Okay, everybody, good to talk to you again, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Light and love.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Life, love, and light, everybody.